Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Lisa Marshall. I am the Director of Organizing and Advocacy at New Yorkers for Clean Power. Welcome to our May 2026 teach-in on heat pump rate design, fairer electric rates for heat pumps across New York. Well, not for the heat pumps themselves, but for the people who have heat pumps in their homes. We're excited to have you here today. Please introduce yourselves in the chat and let us know where you are and what brought you to this teach-in today. Um, I will just quickly introduce the topic by saying that I think most of you know that heat pumps are by far the most efficient and clean way to heat and cool buildings. And we've been working for quite a few years in New York to get the word out about heat pumps, make sure that we have policies in place to encourage the adoption of heat pumps, both in new buildings and existing buildings. And people in New York are responding and are excited about heat pumps, and heat pump adoption rates are going up every year. However, ever since we started talking about heat pumps, we've been thinking about how do we get to scale? How do we get enough heat pumps in buildings in New York in a short enough time to really make a difference for the climate and for the people living in those buildings? And when we face the facts, we have to accept that heat pump adoption is slowed down by the cost factor. Often, when you switch from natural gas to heating with a heat pump, your electricity bill, your electricity bill, of course, goes up, but your overall utility costs go up. And that is not great for heat pump rates, especially with the cost of utilities being a real problem for many, many New Yorkers currently. So we're lucky that heat pumps definitely present cost savings for people switching from delivered fuels like propane and oil. Heat pumps are a huge upgrade if you currently have electric resistance heating. But with the current cost of natural gas and the current cost of electricity, heat pumps are going to end up costing folks in general a little bit more, and nobody wants to pay more. But we have solutions for this, and that brings us to the topic of today's presentation. A wonderful new study just came out by Switchbox, and we have with us here Executive Director of Switchbox, Juan-Pablo Velez. This study was commissioned by the Alliance for Green Economy, or AGREE, and Earth Justice. And so excited to introduce you now to Juan-Pablo, who is going to walk us through the findings of the study. As we go along, please stay muted, but please feel free to type your questions in the chat, and we will have time for Q&A at the end. So without any further ado, take it away, Juan-Pablo.
Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for spending your lunch hour with us. I'm going to be talking about our newest report, as Lisa said. So without further ado, if you don't know us, we're a think tank based here in New York that works on building electrification policies, and we have a big focus now on how to improve our electric rates, particularly for heat pumps. So I'll be covering the kind of cliff notes of the latest report that we just published on this a couple weeks ago, and that is tied to a petition to the Public Service Commission to get these rates to actually happen in New York State. As Lisa mentioned, this report was commissioned by Earth Justice and Alliance for a Green Economy. Now, importantly, before I dig in, I want to give you some links so you can peruse it. There's a link to the full report.
I've got the link.
Okay. The full report's quite long, so you have two options. One, there's a 2-page version, and two, we can mail you a physical version for free if you just sign that Google form. Okay. So let's jump in. I'm going to kind of spoil the rest of the presentation. First, we're going to talk about the fact that when gas homes get, like homes that are heated by natural gas, get heat pumps, their energy bills often go up. Most homes that are heated by delivered fuels or electric resistance do see savings, but their savings are currently not as big as they could be. So that's the problem. And the reason for this is that utilities are overcharging heat pump customers for access to the grid itself, which is not often what you hear. You often hear that bills go up because electricity is expensive and gas is cheap, but it's a little bit more complicated than that, and it's within our control. The solution is to actually charge heat pump customers fairly, not overcharge them using special rates called heat pump rates. And if you do that, what we'll see is that heat pumps become the cheapest way to heat most homes in New York. So that's where we're going. Let's start with the problem statement. And we're going to feature a home in Queens. It's a single floor, 3 bedroom kind of picture, like a little single family home in Queens, and that's what you should have in your mind here. And we're going to talk about its energy use. Um, it currently has a natural gas furnace, and it in a single year, this is its total energy consumption. So most of the energy it's consuming is from gas combustion. Um, and a little bit is for, electricity is for lighting and appliances. The precise units don't matter, just to show that, the vast majority of the energy use is from gas. And then this home is going to, we're going to look at its bills. So we've looked at its energy use. Now let's look at its energy bills. It pays about $1,200 a year for electricity and about $2,000 a year for that gas. So for a total of about $3,200. And this is just some particular home somewhere to kind of illustrate the problem we're talking about. And you can already see that even though electricity is a very small share of its energy use, it's a pretty big share of its energy bills. And that ends up being kind of part of the problem. So then this home gets a heat pump. So we can see the little gas meter gets removed, and now it gets a nice little heat pump there, an air source heat pump. And when it does that, its electricity use almost triples in this case, and its gas use drops dramatically. There's a little bit of gas use left for stove and water heating, but the vast majority of the gas it was using was for heating. And so when folks say that electrification is really energy efficiency, this is what they mean, that you can more than cut a home's energy use in half simply by electrifying. And so we would expect if you're using less energy that you should be paying less for energy, but that's unfortunately not what we're seeing today. The energy use gets cut more than in half, but then the bill, the electric bill, which is the yellow one, more than doubles overall. And because they're still paying some for gas, their total electric bill ends up increasing by about $400. This is annual. So this is like, you look at all their gas and electric bills for the whole year, before and after they get a heat pump. And in total, even though you're using way less energy, you're paying about $400 more a year. So that is the problem that we have. And we're going to try to unpack this puzzle. Of course, this is just a single home in Queens. So the question is, how prevalent is this across all of New York State? And I'm about to show you some stats to kind of show that. So about 15% of homes today, if you're anywhere in New York State, currently heated by natural gas, and you switch to an air source heat pump, about 15% of the time you end up, your annual bills go up by more than $1,000 a year. That's this dark red. And then most folks, about 60%, lose money, not as much, somewhere between $0 and $1,000 a year. So together, we're looking at 3/4 of homes losing money and about a quarter saving a little bit when they switch. If you're curious about which ones save, ask me in the Q&A. I have a little slide prepared for that. So this is today, and this is the main problem facing heat pump adoption. Because 16% of households in the state are heated on natural gas. And if most of them are losing money when they switch, that's clearly going to be a drag on adoption. But of course, about a quarter are heated by delivered fuels like propane and fuel oil. And about another 10–12% are heated by electricity, mostly electric resistance. That's what we see here. And so let's take a look at how they fare today. If you're on a delivered fuel and you're switching to a heat pump, you are mostly in the money. This is what we found in our research. It's kind of well known. It's a well-known sort of fact, but it was nice to confirm it. about half of households will save more than $1,000 a year on the energy bills once they cut out those delivered fuels. That's because delivered fuels, as we know, are very expensive. And then for electric resistance, it's a similarly happy story. About half of the households save over $1,000. Most of the rest save something. Now, the reason that some don't save here, you'd think, they're both using electricity. The heat pump is just using less electricity. So why would anyone not save when they switch? The reason is that a lot of homes are getting significant cooling for the first time. And so that extra cost from the cooling is offsetting the savings from the heating. And that's why some folks end up in the red, although this is not bad red. This is, if folks are using the cooling, that they're getting value out of it. Okay, so it's a pretty dire story if you're switching from gas to a heat pump, and it's a much better story if you're on liquid fuels or electric resistance. Although even here, the savings should be significantly higher than they are if folks weren't getting overcharged for the heat pumps. And we'll see that later on. Okay, so that's the problem. I hope that was clear. Now we're going to talk, really kind of carefully step through why this is happening and why we are claiming that heat pumps are being overcharged for the grid by utilities. So let's go back to our example home in Queens. And we're really going to focus on the electric side of their energy use and especially the energy bills. So as we said, the electricity bill before they switch is about $1,200, and it really almost triples after they get the heat pump. We need to unpack this, though, to understand why that happens. So they are paying about $400 for electrical supply, which is the part of their bill that pays for the actual electrons, the actual energy that they're receiving. And the remainder of the bill is actually paying for the poles and wires. That's called electrical delivery. This is a really important distinction to get clear if you're not familiar with it. Supply is electrons, delivery is poles and wires. Typically, about half the bill goes to electrons and about half goes to poles and wires. This home's in Queens, so it's served by Con Ed, and Con Ed has pretty high delivery costs, which is why it's more of like a 1-to-2 ratio here. But in any event, once they get the heat pump, you see that they're paying almost 3 times more for supply. Goes from about $400 to almost to $1,100. And that tracks with the fact that they're consuming almost 3 times more electrons. So this kind of makes sense, right? You are tripling your energy use, you're paying 3 times more for the electrons. But they're also paying more than twice as much for the poles and wires. And this is the part that doesn't necessarily make as much sense, because our study shows that their fair share of delivery costs, so what their bill should be, is actually closer to about $1,000. And in fact, they were actually underpaying slightly because their fair share was about $1,000 before, when they were natural gas. So their bill was a little less than what they should have been paying, and now it's way, way more. It's about $855 more than they should be paying, which happens to be the average. If you look at this now, look at every single home that has a heat pump right now in New York State, and you ask how much they're paying for poles and wires and how much should they be paying. Most of them are overpaying. That's the red part. And most of them are overpaying by, this is the average of $855 a year. That's the average overpayment across the entire state. That's why I picked this particular home, is that it overpays exactly by the average amount that homes tend to overpay by. So the next part is understanding why exactly overpayments happen, right? So what I'm telling you is that they're overpaying on delivery. Now let's try to step through and understand why. And to kind of spoil it, it has to do with the use of volumetric rates to pay for poles and wires. So volumetric rates are, you pay more if you consume more electricity. And as we'll see, that's the root of the problem here. Okay, so I'm going to step through now kind of a general home. The typical home consumes some amount of kilowatt hours of electricity every year. So now let's look at the costs that usage is imposing on the utility. Let's start with electrical supply, so the electrons. So all those kilowatt hours of usage, the utility has to go out and actually buy that electricity on the market. So they're paying some amount of wholesale energy cost on your behalf, which you then have to pay them back. And so the way that you pay them back is through your bill, and the bill is calculated with a volumetric rate. A volumetric rate simply says for every one of these kilowatt hours, you need to pay, in this case, let's say 15 cents. And that creates a bill. So the bill here is in dollars, and it roughly matches the cost in dollars that the utility incurred to give you that energy. They have to go out and buy it on the wholesale market, and then they charge you a retail rate of 15 cents per dollar. And it's never exactly perfectly aligned, but it's pretty close. Now let's talk about how poles and wires work, because this is the key part. It turns out that most of your delivery bill is paying for the existing transmission and distribution grid that is already built. That has nothing to do with your usage. You could have zero usage, and if you're connected to the grid, you still have to help pay for that stuff that's already been built. So it's not connected to usage at all. The part of your bill that is connected to usage is this very, very small light blue part. So let's say some of this usage, this is for the whole year, but some of it occurred during, the really hot summer afternoons, where if you're using your air conditioner there, or just any electricity, you're contributing to the need to upgrade the grid. They're going to upgrade the capacity of transmission or of the power line on your block or something like that. So those are new transmission and distribution costs. But they make up a very, very small share. The part of the delivery costs that you pay for that are kind of in your control or that you affect with your usage is a very small part of the bill. It's the light blue part. Whereas on the supply part, it's almost the entire bill. If you don't use any electricity, then you have very low costs and you would have a very low bill. That's the idea here. Now, let's say this home gets heat pumps. And what happens is, we need to talk about how the bill is paid for. So part of the delivery bill is paid for with what's called a fixed charge, where everybody gets charged, let's say $6 a month, regardless of their usage. So this is similar, right, to like the fixed costs of the grid. There's a fixed charge. But most of the bill is actually also paid for by volumetric rates. So it is sort of the same, it's proportional to how much usage you use. So let's say it's 12 cents per kilowatt hour that you're being charged, then you would pay about that much for poles and wires. And in general, it tends to line up with the average cost, the average kind of fair share of poles and wires for each customer. Until people get heat pumps. This is where the problem comes in. So let's say you get a heat pump and your usage doubles, right? Because now you have all that new electricity use in winter to heat the home, so your usage doubles. That means you're now creating twice as many costs for the utility. They have to buy that energy for you. And here, the volumetric rate works well because all that extra usage just gets charged 15 cents per kilowatt hour, which means your bill also doubles. And so it's still roughly in line with your costs, which have doubled. So that works well. However, the only part of your delivery cost that increases from all the extra usage is this home in particular gained more cooling than they had before. They just had window units. Now they have nice mini splits. They get more cooling. And so that means that some of this usage is happening during the peak. And so they're creating a little bit more grid upgrades from their peak usage that they were before because they have more usage. But again, that's just for the little part of their delivery cost that can change. But they're being charged for every kilowatt hour, even though only some of these affect a small part of their bill. And so what happens is the volumetric part of their delivery bill doubles because it mirrors what's going on with their usage, even though their costs don't double. And this is the overpayment. And that's why I mentioned that the culprit is sort of using volumetric rates to pay for delivery costs because delivery costs don't scale with usage the way that supply costs do. That's the big idea. And if you have clarification questions, please ask me in the Q&A. Okay, so that's the diagnosis, why heat pump customers are being overcharged for the grid. The solution is to charge them fairly using heat pump rates. So let's do that now. We're going to take the example of NYSEG, a utility upstate. NYSEG has about 27,000 heat pump customers by our estimates, which is about 3% of their customer base. And if you add up all of their bills, how much they're paying for electrical delivery right now, those heat pump customers, they're paying about $60 million a year. But if you ask how much they should be paying, like what their cost of what we call the cost of service is, their sort of fair share of the delivery costs, we think it's closer to $32 million a year. And that means how much are they overpaying? If you add up all those overpayments, they're overpaying by $28 million. They're paying 60 million. We think they should be paying about 32, which means they're overpaying by 28 million, or about 89%. And the reason we call this a cross subsidy is that because they're paying extra for the kind of fixed costs of the grid, that allows other customers to pay less. Imagine you're going out to dinner and I get generous and I pick up, more of the bill. That lets you pick up less of the bill because the bill is mostly fixed. That's the basic intuition, and I can go into more detail in the Q&A. Now, electric resistance customers have the exact same problem where they're paying, in this case, for 19% of all the delivery costs, but they should be paying about 10%. So they're also kind of overpaying. They're also paying about twice as much as they should be, and that allows electrical customers that heat with natural gas or delivered fuels to underpay. So just to do a quick example, we think that natural gas customers should be paying about $422 million a year in NYSEG's territory, but they're actually paying about $344 a year. So they're underpaying by 77 million. And why? Because heat pump and electric resistance customers are overpaying, and that lets them underpay. That's the sort of big problem here. So we have a perverse situation where we want to promote electric heating and move folks from fossil heating to electric heating, but we are overcharging electric heating to give a discount to fossil fuel, to the electric bills of folks who heat with fossil fuels. That's the big problem. So our goal in designing heat pump rates is to change that and to eliminate that $28 million overpayment and to make the rates fair. Here's how we do it. The first step is called cost allocation. You measure utilities. You basically do what we did already, and I've showed you, which is you measure how much heat pump customers should be paying. What is their delivery cost of service? So for NYSEG, we estimate that to be about 32 million, even though they're currently paying 60 million, which is the revenue. And then once you know how much money you should be collecting from those customers, you can design a special rate for those customers. You'll often hear this described as a tech-specific rate or a dedicated rate. And the precise rate design doesn't matter that much in terms of making the rates fair. What matters is simply that the rate collects $32 million and not $60 million. You can also solve other problems in the details of how you design the rate, but the important part is cost allocation. And so I'll show you the dumbest possible heat pump rate just to give you a sense for how this works. So right now, if you're in NYSEG territory, you pay about 10 cents per kilowatt hour for delivery. And we noticed that they need to be collecting about 46% less revenue, 46% less in total revenue from heat pump customers. So one thing you could do is just lower that volumetric rate by about 46%. So you're still mostly charging them with volumetric rates, but you're just charging them less for each of those kilowatt hours, and that will get the job done. Okay, we did something a little bit more sophisticated, though, in our report, which is what I'm going to walk you through now, and it's called the dedicated heat pump delivery rate, electric delivery rate. So how does it work? Well, the first thing to say is we're not touching the supply side at all. When you get a heat pump, you consume more electrons and you should pay for those electrons. That's not the issue. As I've said the whole time, the issue is transmission, how much folks are being charged for transmission and distribution. So electric delivery. Right now, it's about 10 cents per kilowatt hour in NYSEG's territory. And what we're proposing is to make it a seasonal rate if you have a heat pump. So you would still pay the same in the summer, but in the winter, when all those new kilowatt hours come in, you'd pay about 70% less. That's the big idea. And because you're paying significantly less in the winter, that you end up not being overcharged because that's when most of your usage is. And we designed a similar rate for all the utilities in New York State. which you can the details of which are in the report. But they all have this sort of same idea of like, in the summer, you pay the same amount as everybody else, and in the winter, you pay significantly less so that you don't overpay across the whole year. That's not the only heat pump rate we design in the report. I'm not going to go through these in detail. I'll just kind of mention them briefly. This is the one we just talked about. The eligibility is only for heat pump customers, and it only affects the delivery side, and the design is sort of seasonal the way you saw. Then we have something called an electric heating rate, which is the same exact idea. It only affects delivery, but it also includes electric resistance customers. Because as you saw, they're also being overcharged. And so there's a fairness problem there as well. And the last one is a bit fancier. It only applies to electric heating customers. But here we're actually affecting both delivery and supply by making them kind of a time of use rate. So you're not always paying 10 cents or 3 cents per kilowatt hour. It depends on the time of day. And the point of that is, in addition to solving the fairness problem we've been talking about, you also create incentives for shifting your loads, which solves a totally different problem called economic efficiency. But we can do both with this sort of time of use heat pump rate. That again is only for heat pump customers. Happy to talk more about that in the Q&A. Okay, so last but not least, let's say that that heat pump rate I just talked about was actually made available. What would happen to the bills we saw earlier? This is just the chart we saw earlier. Today, under normal delivery rates, if you're on natural gas and you switch to heat pumps, 75% of the time you'd lose money, right? That's the status quo. Now, if the rates were made available and folks were not only getting heat pumps, but also enrolling in the rates. And again, we designed one for every utility. So these are statewide results, but they would just enroll in their utilities rate. If you do that, then the numbers totally flip. And now we're in a world where 3/4 of gas heated households actually save money by switching to heat pumps. That's the big result from our report. And about a quarter would still lose money, but notice that they would lose less than $1,000 a year. $1,000 a year is like $200 per heating season extra. That's where you really notice it. This is more like anywhere between $50 and $100 more usually. So it's still not the best, but we're not in sort of backlash territory. So it is a total transformation of the gas to heat pump operating cost impact. Just for completeness, let's look at what happens to delivered fuels, right? They were already saving money. Now they save even more money, which kind of makes sense. Another about 20% of folks save more than $1,000 a year now when they switch. Electric resistance, again, was good before. Now it's also better. It's a little bit better because when they switch to a heat pump, not only are they using less electricity overall, but the delivery part of that electricity is being charged less. And so their savings are higher. Now, just for completeness, if we instead had the electric heating rate, then they would get a discount before and after they switch. That's kind of the point of that electric heating rate we talked about. And so the savings wouldn't be quite as good because they are not being overcharged to begin with. And so when they switch, they're not being overcharged for delivery before or after they switch. And so the savings come purely from less electricity use. So the savings are not as high, but they're still quite good, enough that it's probably not going to deter anybody from switching. That's kind of the takeaway here. Okay. But of course, remember that what we're doing is the utility needs to collect a certain amount of money every year to pay off the grid that it's already invested in. And if some customers are overpaying and other customers are underpaying, then if we get all the heat pump customers to enroll in a fair rate, they'll be paying less. That's the whole point. And that means that if somebody else has to pay more to offset that. So when I say there's a cross-subsidy, that's what I mean, is right now, if you made rates fair, folks that are on fossil fuels would need to pay a little bit extra because that subsidy would be removed. How much extra? It works out to about $2 a month on their electric bills. That's how much sort of the average subsidy is that's being contributed by heat pump customers. So if you unwind the subsidy, that's the bill impact. $2 a month if you are not on heat pump customer, if you're not a heat pump customer, and all the heat pump customers out there get on these rates. So in my opinion, it's probably not enough that anybody would notice because typical bills fluctuate by more than that. And the reason the impact is so small is only about 3% of the state is on heat pumps. So if you take the fact that 3% of customers are overpaying, and then you spread out those overpayments across like the other, all the fossil heating customers out there, it ends up creating a really small subsidy, which means this is not a very good policy because it's kind of destroying the economics of switching from gas to heat pumps for a very, very small and diffuse benefit. Of course, we also talked about the electric heating rate. So what if we also remove the overpayments from our electric resistance customers? That means there's more money, there's a bigger shortfall now. So if we do that, if we make rates totally fair, then the bill impact would be higher. It would be about $10 a month on fossil heating customers because they're now not being subsidized at all. We've completely removed the subsidy from electric heating customers. Okay, and it's important to say that like this adjustment we just talked about would only happen once. It would be a one-time adjustment. And then any new households that get heat pumps and enroll in the rates at the same time, they just wouldn't be overpaying to begin with. They're not contributing to the subsidy, so there's nothing to undo. This is like a one-time thing we would fix. Okay, that's the bulk of the presentation, and happy to take questions once we get to Q&A.
Thank you so much, Juan-Pablo. Always something new to learn. I'm going to unspotlight you. And Lorenzo, if you could share the slides, I'm going to introduce our next presenter. So, and please keep the great questions coming in the chat. We'll be taking them as we can. So most of you know that that there is a lot of energy policy that is made by the Public Service Commission. They are oops, I should put my camera back on. Whoops. Hello. They are our energy regulators. And the way they make policy is called a proceeding. They open a proceeding and people become parties to that proceeding. People can make comments on what happens in that proceeding, and the proceeding ends with an order. So we think this heat pump rate is a really great idea and that all the utilities in New York should have one. And there's a proceeding at the Public Service Commission where we think that is the appropriate place to ask for this to happen. And so I'm going to introduce our next speaker to tell us all about that. And that is Magdalen Sullivan, an attorney for the Environmental Defense Fund. And we're so happy to have Magdalen. She's a first-time presenter at an NYCP teach-in. Where are you, Magdalen? There you are. Okay, so welcome and go right ahead.
Thanks, Lisa. Hi, everyone. And thanks, Juan-Pablo, for that great presentation. As Lisa said, my name is Magdalen Sullivan, and I'm an attorney with Environmental Defense Fund. And I'm going to give a brief overview of a petition that we filed with the New York Public Service Commission a few weeks ago that aims to harness the findings of the Switchbox analysis that we just heard about and into real beneficial change for electric heat customers in New York. The petition was filed jointly on May 5th by the organizations that you see listed here: EDF, AGREE, Building Decarbonization Coalition, Earth Justice, New Yorkers for Clean Power, Rewiring America, and Sierra Club. It was really a team effort and a team push here. We can go to the first slide. So yeah, some just very high level background for those who aren't familiar with the Public Service Commission. The Public Service Commission is the state agency that regulates electric utility companies. And a core part of that commission, of the commission's regulatory responsibility, is ensuring that rates are just and reasonable. The Department of Public Service, or DPS, is the staff and advisory arm of the commission. And to briefly cover the different types of matters that can be before the commission, and this is not a definitive list, but so there are rate cases. And to explain briefly, before a utility can change its rates, it must go to the commission for permission. And how much a utility can charge customers, which operational costs a utility can recover through rates, and how much money it collects from ratepayers to pay its investors is all meticulously debated in rate cases among the utility and DPS staff and other stakeholders. Based on the record developed in the rate case, the commission then makes a final determination as to what it considers to be just and reasonable, and will approve new electric rates based on that determination. Then there are policy proceedings, and I'm using this general term to cover matters outside of rate cases in which the commission can make statewide policies or explore reforms on any topic related to its regulatory oversight. And in this instance, we are operating in the grid of the future proceeding, which I'll explain further on the next slide. And lastly, I just want to note is that the commission acts by issuing orders, and commission orders can direct the regulated entities, so in this instance, electric utilities, to act. And a commission order may also issue directives to DPS staff. So on the next slide, I'll just cover the grid of the future proceeding, which is where we're operating now. So to respond to new and increased demands on New York's electric grid, the commission initiated the grid of the future proceeding in April 2024, with the stated aim of determining possible future actions that the commission could take to substantially promote the timely and effective evolution of the electric grid. That's a direct quote. The commission ordered DPS staff to develop a grid of the future plan, which is supposed to include strategies for grid flexibility that can help New York achieve its clean energy goals at a manageable cost and at the highest levels of reliability. One of the topics that the commission directed DPS staff to include in that plan was how alternative rate designs can benefit heat pump customers and how those alternative rate designs can contribute to grid flexibility. Despite this directive in the initiating order, in March 2025, DPS staff published the first iteration of the plan, which did not meaningfully engage with alternative rate design. The second iteration of the plan is expected to be published at the end of next month, and the goal of the petition that we just filed is to influence this second iteration of the plan. So on the next slide, we'll cover all about the petition, which was filed on May 5th, a few weeks ago. And the petition asks the commission to direct DPS staff to include alternative rate designs that benefit electric heat customers in the grid of the future plan. I won't repeat Juan-Pablo's presentation, but we'll note that the petition summarizes the findings of the Switchbox analysis and highlights the gross overpayment of electric heat customers that is caused by default electric rates, and submits the Switchbox report to the Grid of the Future docket as an attachment to the petition. The petition highlights examples of alternative rates from utilities in other states and rate reform efforts in other jurisdictions that are aimed at benefiting electric heat customers. And the petition also details existing alternative rates offered by New York utilities, but notes that those are opt-in rates and have low participation levels, possibly because people do not know about them or understand them. And finally, the petition offers a list of recommended next steps for the commission and DPS staff, which on the final slide, I will detail. Those recommendations include making alternative rate options that benefit electric heat customers a key strategy in the forthcoming Grid of the Future plan, holding a technical workshop to discuss implementation of alternative rates, directing utilities to implement alternative rates by the end of next year, directing utilities to begin conducting customer outreach and education on alternative rates by the end of next year, and directing utilities to regularly report data on rate uptake and realized savings. And one general thing I'd like to note is last year, EDF filed testimony in the Con Ed rate case proposing alternative rate designs specifically aimed at benefiting heat pump customers. And though Con Ed eventually made commitments in the joint proposal that was later approved by the commission regarding alternative rate design and outreach and education to heat pump customers, neither the company nor staff initially embraced EDF's proposal. And staff filed rebuttal testimony that pointed to this proceeding, the grid of the future proceeding, as the place to engage in rate reform. So this petition is not only urging that DPS staff follow the commission's initiating order by implementing the changes outlined here. We're also bringing the issue to a forum that staff has explicitly identified as its preferred venue to engage in rate reform. And I hope it's clear from the findings of the Switchbox analysis and from this overview of administrative background that rate setting is not the result of an objective calculation, but it is a practice in policymaking. The way electric rates are set in New York is a policy decision under the clear discretion of the New York Public Service Commission. And those policy decisions drive customer choices and customer behaviors. And rates are and can be used as a tool to advance policy outcomes. And in this instance, we are urging the Commission to make decisions that are aligned with New York's commitment to affordability and its clean energy goals. And we hope that you all can join us in this effort. And I'll turn it over to Jessica Azulay with Agree, who can cover how you can do so.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Magdalen and Juan-Pablo. I have the pleasure of telling you how you can harness all the energy in the chat about how unfair these rates are and what we can do together to take action. So I'm Jessica Azulay. I'm Executive Director at Alliance for a Green Economy. You can go to the next slide. And just a very quick review here before we ask you to take action on who the decision makers are, where they're going to make the decision, and what we're trying to accomplish together. So the decision makers, again, are the Public Service Commission. They are the ultimate deciders on how rates are structured in New York. The venue is the grid of the future proceeding. That's the process where the commission has said they want to discuss and rule on this topic. And we are trying to get an outcome where by the end of 2027, the Public Service Commission has ordered utilities to implement new rates, and they are in place by the end of 2027. And our first milestone for getting that to happen is to get the Public Service Commission, the Department of Public Service staff, to include rate reform in their Grid of the Future plan, which is due at the end of June. So that's what we're driving for here. That's what we're working together to achieve, and that's what we're asking you to participate in and support. Next slide. So Magdalen just talked about the petition that we filed, and we are now asking our community, organizations, industry, and individuals to demonstrate support for this petition and build the pressure on the Department of Public Service staff and the Commission by demonstrating that people are starting to understand this issue and they want the Commission to address it. So there are three different options for taking action today, and they're going to be shared in the chat. There are going to be three different links. One is we're asking organizations to sign a letter that will be filed in the docket to support the petition. So if you are the head of an organization, staff at an organization, a member of an organization that you think could potentially support this petition, please consider supporting the petition and signing on to the organizational sign-on letter. There's also a sign-on letter for the heat pump industry because this impacts investments in New York and the ability to scale heat pump adoption in New York. And so there are heat pump industry partners who are working on a sign-on letter as well, and there will be a link to share that in the chat. So if you're a member of the heat pump industry, we invite you to sign that letter.
Jessica, for the heat pump contractors on the call who install heat pumps, which letter should they sign?
They should sign the industry letter, I believe. But take a look at both letters, see what feels most appropriate to you. And I will let others who have organized that industry sign-on letter to tell me if that advice was wrong. And then finally, we are asking individuals to submit public comments into the proceeding. So individuals can weigh in on the decisions that the Public Service Commission is considering. And so There is a individual comment form for anybody who supports this petition to submit a brief comment. We recommend there's a sample comment in there that you can use as the basis for your comment. We recommend that you personalize this, say a little bit about who you are, where you are, and why this matters to you. Because the more individualized the comments are, the more weight they will have with the commission. And with that, I will pass it back to the MC to take questions.
Thank you so much, Jessica, and all of our presenters. And thanks to everybody who is on this teach-in. There's so many good questions in the chat. Can you guys hear me? Oh, sorry, I was talking, but somehow I was muted. Okay, thank you so much to Jessica and all of our wonderful presenters and all of your great comments in the chat. Now is time for our questions, and what I'm asking you to do is type those questions in the chat and we will take them from there. I see a text from Megan. All of the links are shared in the chat, but I can reshare them. But the org sign-on letter was shared, the industry sign-on letter was shared, and the individual sign-on letter was shared. Let me reshare the organizational sign-on letter.
I think you maybe mislabeled it because there's two industry sign-on letters. So
I didn't mislabel it. I just shared the other one twice.
okay, thanks.
Okay, there we go. So let's look at some of these great questions, which I think that Juan-Pablo has been going through and answering them as we go. Sorry, I had them, but then I got distracted by the links. So I can kick it off. Juan-Pablo, can you define a heat pump customer? Does that mean that you have installed heat pumps, but you still have your conventional fossil fuel heating system, or B, that you have installed heat pumps and you have had your conventional fossil fuel heating system removed, or C, unclear?
It's a good question. I think you can still have gas backup and you're still overpaying. Like, as long as you're mostly heating with a heat pump, you're probably overpaying. Because remember, the key idea is just that, like, when you get a heat pump, you're probably not increasing your delivery costs very much, but you're mechanically going to increase how much you pay on your delivery bill. So you're pretty likely to be overpaying the more electrons you consume with a heat pump. And so it doesn't matter if you occasionally use a gas backup, you're still going to be getting overcharged, probably.
Right. So in our petition, we aren't asking anything in particular at that level of detail. That would have to be figured out by the Public Service Commission.
That's right.
Can we change the settings so I'm not just seeing myself? I don't know. I can't see the group. Okay. There we go. That's much more comfortable. So Simon is asking, says, Juan-Pablo, you suggest the delivery rates charged by the utility should not be based on the volume of kilowatt hours consumed by the customer. Are there any New York utilities that base delivery charges for additional consumption on a different metric? Has the Public Service Commission approved any such different rate methodologies?
So the short answer, long answer. Short answer is yes. Con Ed has something called the steady use rate. That is, the delivery part gets done using what's called the demand charge, where it's based on your maximum instantaneous usage of the month rather than your total amount of energy consumption. There's basically two ways you can solve this problem, right? Like, you can either make it so that the fixed charge is a lot bigger and is closer to the fixed costs, and then people are paying less based on their usage, and so you get this distortion less. But of course, that's pretty disruptive. And it turns out from some research we've done, you'd have to quadruple the fixed charge. So it'd have to go from like $20 to like $80 a month in most of the utilities in order to really eliminate the cross-subsidy. And so it's a very dramatic change that would apply to everybody. The other approach is you make a special exception for heat pumps, and you're like, look, if you get a heat pump, we're not going to charge you a higher fixed rate. We're going to give you a special rate. And like I said, that special rate could look a lot of ways. The way we did it, it was simply by lowering the volumetric charge in the winter. You can do anything that'll just stop over collecting from them. But we have tended to not do it with a fixed charge in our designs. Instead, we just lower the volumetric because it guarantees that everybody can save money when they switch. And that means there's the possibility for utilities to auto-enroll heat pump customers. We're not advocating for that per se in the report, but if you can say, hey, everybody with a heat pump is going to get a special rate, we know for a fact that rate's not going to change anybody's bills, is going to increase anybody's bills. Then you could potentially, everybody could wake up one day and be auto-enrolled if the utility knows who they are, because who wouldn't want to pay lower bills without lifting a finger? So broadly speaking, yeah, you can increase the fixed charge on everybody. That's one approach, and it's tough to do. Or you can treat heat pump customers differently, and then the sort of simplest lift there is just to lower the volumetric charge so that you're still charging them based on their usage, but just less. And so the amount you collect from them is closer to what they should be paying.
Okay, great. Thanks for that. There's a lot of back and forth in the chat because when we electrify everything, we are not just switching our heating, but we're also driving electric cars, installing solar, putting in water heaters. How does this affect, how does a heat pump rate affect sort of different customer appliance uses that are beyond the heat pumps? And, how can we account for all of that?
It depends a little bit on how you would design the rate, but the way they did in Massachusetts is they said, hey, Scout's honor, if you tell us you have a heat pump, we're going to trust you and we're going to give you that lower volumetric delivery rate in winter. And that rate applies to all your usage. So if you have an EV, then you get cheaper EV charging. Now, for some people, that's kind of imperfect, and it is, but if you wanted to make it, there's two ways to make that more precise. One is you would have to do verification, which means probably doing some kind of home inspection or maybe looking at their bills. That adds friction now. And the other is separate metering for the heat pump. That way you can only discount the amount from the heat pump, and that adds even more friction. Both of those would make it much harder to do auto enrollment. And if you're not doing auto enrollment, if these rates are now opt-in and you have to convince millions of heat pump, all the 3% of heat pump customers out there to get on these rates, what we see with optional rates is that people don't get on them. So if you want to solve the problem, one practical pathway is you're like, this is not perfect, but it solves a good amount of the problem. And there's an option to do what they did in Massachusetts, which is look at everybody who's received a heat pump rebate for installation and identify them, the utilities identify them, and then they get auto-enrolled in a rate that guarantees them a discount. That's sort of like the practical path here. And yes, those folks will then also pay less for all their other electrical stuff. So it's not perfect, but it's sort of like, do you want a perfect rate that nobody adopts, or do you want to kind of get the job done? At least that's my kind of personal editorializing on the strategy here. There's another question latent in there, which is, well, does this overpayment problem apply to other electrical appliances? For water heaters, maybe a little bit, but there's not that many kilowatt hours there. So you're unlikely to end up getting dramatically overcharged. A water heater doesn't like double your usage in a year, which will double your delivery bill, right? That's what causes the overpayment. EVs, though, consume a lot of electrons, and so they will cause the same problem. You will get overcharged probably if you get an EV. The reason we're less concerned about it is that when you go from a gas car to an EV, your charging, your energy bills usually go down. And so if all you cared about was fairness, then yes, you would actually do a similar intervention for EVs. But we're trying to balance multiple values here, right? And the problem with heat pumps is it's unfair, and the unfairness is killing the economics, right? For EVs, it's not. Like you're not only saving money, but also right now people aren't buying EVs because of the bills mostly anyway. So there isn't, to my view, there is not a slippery slope where you're going to have to make a special rate for every last little technology under the sun. We're trying to electrify heating. It's going to double the usage of most homes. It's a cornerstone part of our decarbonization strategy. And it's the part that is suffering because we're charging it unfairly. So a practical way to solve the problem is saying electric heating gets a discount. It's not even a discount. It's a correction of the unfairness. These are all great questions. These are all trade-offs, but that's the sort of philosophy of this approach. And the other approach is, yeah, you raise the fixed charge and you make a demand charge. But again, those are very big disruptive changes that are likely to be opposed by lots of stakeholders and less likely to happen. The idea of quadrupling the fixed charge overnight is just not going to happen. And therefore, we'll just live with the problem, or we can do something. We can do this other approach. Sorry, that was a bit of a run-on. Lisa, any last questions for me or anybody else?
Yep. I'm going to give you the hard question to answer. Of course, when you do a study, you base it on electric rates in a fixed point in time, and the cost of gas at a fixed point in time, which differ across utilities, and then you average them out for the purposes of this presentation. However, probably everyone here is very aware of the fluctuating and cost of these commodities, and Joy asks, what happens as the cost of natural gas goes up? And so maybe it would be good to address that, because every study is sort of immediately obsolete as soon as it's published, because the cost of things change.
It's an excellent question. Let's say the cost of gas doubled because of commodity prices or something. That chart that has lots of red right now and a little bit of green, you'd have more green, because all of a sudden you're saving money by switching. But let's think about why. You're not saving money because like electric heating is cheap. You're saving money because gas heating got way more expensive. And there'd still be an unfairness problem. Like you may be switching to electric heating, and you're saving money because you're getting really ripped off on gas, but you're still overpaying for electric heating. Just to kind of, so it's better, but only in relative terms, not in absolute terms. And there's still the unfairness problem. And it's a really good question, though. It's like, is that chart just, how different would it be from year to year as supply charges, as the price of gas supply changes? We've looked at that chart by changing the supply cost year to year, and it moves around a little bit, but less than you would think. It's actually a pretty durable effect, even as supply costs move around.
I'm afraid that's all we have time for today. I really appreciate all of this great information, all the great questions. Please join New Yorkers for Clean Power for our June teach-in. If you love heat pumps, you'll want to come back, because we have presenters who are going to present on a really amazing heat pump technology that are these window heat pumps that I think if you're excited about balcony solar, I think you'll also be excited about window heat pumps. So please sign up for that. We will save the chat and try to go through and make sure all the questions are answered in our follow-up email that goes out to you. Really appreciate Agree and Earth Justice for commissioning this study, Switchbox for doing this fantastic study and breaking it down so that we can all understand it and begin to take the advocacy steps we need towards getting heat pump rates for everyone. And thanks to Magdalen and EDF for explaining how we're going to do that in the grid of the future. I had to grin when I heard that the staff directed us to work in that docket, because I'm sure once we start to work in that docket, they'll say, no, you need to do it somewhere else. So, but let's make them stick to what they said. Just a little PSC PTSD sharing there. But we are going to make them do it in the grid of the future docket. There's a petition. There's ways to support the petition. You're now on our mailing list. You will get future actions to keep supporting heat pump rates in New York. And thanks again, everybody, for being here. We will follow up with the email with all the information probably tomorrow, maybe today. Let's see how today goes. And please sign up for our June teach-in. I'm going to put that link one more time in the chat. Thanks, everybody, and have a lovely Thursday.